All right, well, look, Steve, what I want to talk about today, two very important topics, man, and we may talk a little bit about Philando Castile also, kind of get into that somewhat. We've talked about economic boycotts on the show before in the history of economic boycotts. We've talked about, last week we talked about Medgar Evers and the legacy of Medgar Evers. Fighting in Mississippi for voting rights and fighting in segregation. And in 1962 in Jackson, Mississippi, he led economic boycotts against white businesses. We've talked about the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which lasted 381 days, started December 5th, 1955, went to December 20th, 1956 in Montgomery, Alabama. We talked a couple months ago, we talked about the Birmingham campaign in 1963 when Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth asked Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to come in and help them in Birmingham, Alabama, fight against segregation. And they had economic boycotts there as well. So, there are different examples throughout our history, especially if we just look at the civil rights era, different examples of economic boycotts that were successful. Well, there was one in Tuskegee, Alabama that was very successful also, and a lot of people don't know about it. And that was the Tuskegee, Alabama boycott that started in 1957. This is very successful. It's protesting against really voter suppression and trying to keep African Americans from voting. And this one lasts even longer than the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Okay, most of our people have never heard about this. So we're going to talk some about that. And then also we know that June 19th, a couple days ago, was the anniversary of Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is a celebration. We know this past Monday was June 19th. That's a celebration and commemoration of when Major General Gordon Granger in 2000 Union troops went into Galveston, Texas. They're in Texas. They make their way to Galveston, Texas, and he delivers General Order Number 3, letting the enslaved African people know that they were free. Now, this is after the Civil War ends. Civil War ends officially June 2nd, 1865, and this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered January 1st, 1863, even though it did not free the slaves. We're going to talk about that history as well. So very, very important history dealing with Juneteenth. And we'll probably talk a little bit about Philando Castile because the verdict came out last Friday. And that was the day after I was last on with Steve. And those who follow me on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, where we almost have 1 million followers, you saw the 2 hour and 5 minute broadcast I did last Friday dealing with the not guilty verdict and dealing with the case and then dealing with the need to redistribute the pain through economic withdrawal strategies. Okay, so in June of 1957, some sources say June 17th, some say June 25th, you have the beginning of the Tuskegee boycott, the Tuskegee boycott. So African Americans began to boycott city stores in Tuskegee, Alabama, as a way to protest the law that prohibited them from municipal votes by strategically placing their homes outside of city limits. This was gerrymandering going on. Tuskegee, Alabama had a African American majority population. However, whites mostly owned the businesses and held the municipal offices. African Americans began a voter registration drive with the Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University, which obtained, we know about Tuskegee Institute because of Booker T. Washington and Dr. George Washington Carver. So the Tuskegee Institute obtained the voter registration drive that the Tuskegee Institute had obtained some success. Yet the Alabama state legislature redrew the Tuskegee town boundaries that excluded the Tuskegee Institute. In response, African Americans who were right-thinking and oftentimes had a better understanding of politics in 1957 than we do in 2017, redistributed the pain to those inflicting pain upon them through economic withdrawal strategies. And this is going to culminate with the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Gomillion versus Lightfoot. Gomillion versus Lightfoot. And this is a ruling involving gerrymandering. So what happens is that you have the state legislature in Alabama passing Act number 140. Act number 140. And this allowed them to redraw the boundaries in Tuskegee, Alabama, and disenfranchise African Americans. Okay, and this fight is going to gain national attention. So in 1957, in an effort to frustrate increasing African American voter registration and the threat of losing a white voter majority, Alabama State Senator Sam Inglehart sponsored Act number 140. And this proposed to transform the Tuskegee city boundaries from a square, from the shape of a square, into a 28-sided shape resembling a seahorse. They wanted to, once again, our people had a better understanding oftentimes of politics and the impact of politics on their everyday life than many of our people do today. Politics, two main ways to understand politics. Number one, the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. The legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Number two, the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. The writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So with Act number 140, those in power in the state of Alabama wanted to maintain their power by any means necessary. So they want to redraw the Tuskegee, Alabama city boundaries from a square, the shape of a square, into a 28-sided shape resembling a seahorse. And this new district they wanted to draw included every single one of the 600 white voters in Tuskegee, Alabama, but excluded all except 5 of the 400 African American voters. This new district they wanted to draw. Now they're doing gerrymandering all over the place. They just did a redistricting of Detroit Public Schools. Power is the ability to define and shape reality and to have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. And politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So they're trying to redraw district lines in Tuskegee, Alabama, gerrymandering, to include every one of the 600 white voters in Tuskegee, Alabama, and exclude all except 5 of the 400 African American voters in Tuskegee, Alabama. Now, it's important to understand, African Americans had a numerical, they were the numerical majority in Tuskegee, Alabama. So Sam Inglehart, Alabama State Senator Sam Inglehart, who was a plantation owner and executive secretary of the Alabama Association of the White Citizens Council, he said this, quote, "The folks up there feel like I do. Civil rights legislation is going to pass the United States Senate either this year or the next, and we're going to be prepared for it. We couldn't stand seeing a Negro in the Alabama legislature. We could not stand seeing a Negro in the Alabama legislature." At least he used the word Negro. At least he was nice enough to say Negro as opposed to something else.
That was a long economic boycott, though, man.
Brother. And it worked, too. We're going to get into that. And it worked. So last week we talked about the White Citizens Council, right? Mm-hmm. They're officially known as the Citizens Council, ostensibly known as the White Citizens Council because they were all white. So they start in Mississippi in 1954. Okay, they were established in the Delta, Mississippi. And last week when we talked about Medgar Evers, we saw that African Americans in the Delta of Mississippi outnumbered whites 4-1. Okay, and then we're going to see this spread throughout Mississippi, and they spread all throughout the South, and they go into Alabama. And in 1959, the White Citizens Council, they put their weight behind Ross Barnett, who was a candidate for governor, and he wins the governorship with the help of the White Citizens Council. Well, you're dealing with the White Citizens Council in Alabama as well, and they're made up of bankers and politicians and landowners, plantation owners, things like this. Okay, so for years, Alabama had quite successfully discouraged and thwarted African American voter registration. But with new civil rights legislation threatening to make disenfranchisement more difficult, the Alabama legislature decided to deliver a preemptory assault on African American self-determination. Despite appeals by prominent African American community members to the city council there in Tuskegee, Alabama, the county commission, the Alabama legislature's committee on local legislation, and even a direct appeal to the voters in an open letter in the Montgomery Advisor, which was a local newspaper there, on June 14th of 1957, the Alabama State Senate unanimously approved the bill, Act Number 140, and on June 21st, 1957, the State House of Representatives followed along with the State Senate, and they had an overwhelming vote, 80-0, in favor of Act Number 140. So at this time in Tuskegee, Alabama, the African American population was 4 times that of the white population. You had 5,397 African Americans compared to 1,310 whites. 5,397 African Americans compared to 1,310 whites. You have a local paint store manager named Frank Olin, O-A-L-I-N, and he was a member of the city council. And he said, quote, now this is the extent they're going to maintain power then, and they're doing the same thing now with the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, etc. This draconian health care bill, the Senate is drafting behind closed doors, 13 senators, no women involved in there, and women make up the majority of the U.S. population, number one.
Right.
Number two, it's 13. Have you seen them? It's 13. It's 12 white men plus Ted Cruz, who's a white Cuban, who thinks white. It's 13 of them. No women. No women. 1/6 of the American economy. Okay? And women are 51% of the U.S. population. Okay, so this is what Frank Olin said. He's a member of the city council there in Tuskegee, Alabama. He said, quote, it's a matter of self-preservation. It's a matter of self-preservation. Negroes were about to outvote us and take over control of the city. So Senator Sam Engelhardt, Alabama state senator, he said, quote, I gerrymandered those N-words right out of town. I gerrymandered those N-words right out of town. If that Civil Rights Commission comes down here and forces mass registration on unqualified Negroes, there'll be bloodshed. Why? We would have N-words in office. Can you imagine being arrested by an N-word sheriff? This is not somebody dipping snuff on the side of the road drinking moonshine all day. This is an Alabama state senator, Steve. Okay. And what's important for people to understand, now there was a Civil Rights Act of 1957, first of all.
Right.
Then you had the Civil Rights Act of 64. What's important for people to understand is because of the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, Executive Order 11246, September 25th, 1965, which was affirmative action, and the Voting Rights Act of 1968, a lot of the Southern segregationists like him, they leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. This is what people have to understand. Because of these Civil Rights Acts, people like Strom Thurmond leave the Democratic Party and they go to the Republican Party, and that's where they are today. These are the obstructionists. But But you have to understand a chronology of history to understand how this stuff happened. So, all right.
The interesting thing is that if we go back to the maps that Ed Sarpolis drew, based upon the rules that are sitting there, these N-words might be gerrymandered out of office again.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're already going to lose the 13th district seat. So potentially, let's say he stays around. Potentially, he stays around.
You talking about
Conyers could be facing off against Lawrence in the 2020, or was it 2022?
It'd be 2022 because it's 2018. Then 2020. It'd be
2020.
2020, yeah.
2020, he would be facing off against her if he
Brenda
stays
Lawrence.
around. Brenda Lawrence. Okay. Otherwise, Brenda Lawrence is going to be. She's going to have a Macomb County part of her district. Okay. Which does not bode well.
Absolutely. And what's important for people to understand is the party that redraws the district lines every 10 years is the party that's in power. They have the numerical dominance in your state legislature.
That's right.
That's the party. Okay? Right. And they get there by voting. Okay, so I want people to understand this. Many of our people had a better understanding of politics and the impact on politics in our lives in 1957 than 2016 and 2017.
That's right.
Okay.
Maybe because we can see the N-words being gerrymandered out of office again.
Yeah, and they're telling you this. Exactly. Now, they're doing the same thing today with the rapid voter suppression. You had 13 new states. They had new voter ID laws for the 2016 election because Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was struck down in 2013. U.S. Supreme Court decision was struck down, Shelby County versus Holder.
Right.
Okay. So, and we saw the African-American voter turnout drop 7% in the 2016 election. It was rapid voter suppression that took place. Now, if we look at Macon County, Alabama, that is the county that Tuskegee, Alabama was in at the time.
Right.
The educational level of African-Americans in Macon County exceeded the average educational level of whites at that time because of the influence of Tuskegee Institute. Okay, so you have Senator Sam Engelhardt saying that the African Americans were unqualified to vote. Okay, I think it was him that said it. Yeah, unqualified to vote. But African Americans were more qualified to vote than the white people who were voting. Yeah, a lot of white people voting who are illiterate. Okay, so once again, politics is the legal distribution of scarce, well-pound resources, and they're trying to hold on to power by any means necessary. Go ahead, Steve.
Right, and I don't think people see that past is about to repeat itself.
Exactly.
Michael, we got to get ready to go to break.
Sure. We'll continue this on the other side of the break.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with Michael Imhotep. I mean, because I just made the connection between that word,
right,
and I mean that whole statement that guy made, and
right,
what's going to happen in 2022, 2020 around here.
2020, right,
yes.
Right. Well, you have redistricting attempt. We saw last month the Supreme Court struck down a ruling in North Carolina because in North Carolina they were trying to pack African Americans, gerrymander them, pack them into 2 districts. In North Carolina to nullify the power of their vote. And then the Supreme Court just announced they're going to hear another voter redistricting case as well coming up soon also. So I'm telling people, no, this stuff is real. Okay, it has continued. And, one of the mistakes that was made in the civil rights movement, there were successes, but one of the mistakes was that that next generation weren't taught the history of the struggles, weren't taught the history of what they went through to get what the next generation had, number one. Number two, they didn't realize that Jim Crow had sons and daughters. And those sons and daughters had sons and daughters. So now we're dealing with the grandchildren of Jim Crow. We're dealing with Jim and Jane Crow Esquire. Okay. I liken it to Bebe's kids. They don't die, they multiply. Okay, so So this is what we're dealing with. Okay, this is what we're dealing with.
You're giving me Robin Harris flashback.
Robin Harris. I'm talking about the man sitting next to the man sitting next to the man. Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about the 1957 economic boycott in Tuskegee, Alabama, not Montgomery, Tuskegee, Alabama. And this one lasted even longer than the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which lasted 381 days. Now, the White Citizens Council had the political control in the state of Alabama, as well as Mississippi. They're going to spread throughout the South. They started in 1954. I want to go to this clip. This is from Eyes on the Prize. This is from Part 5. Dealing with Mississippi in This America, 1962 to 64. This is William J. Simmons of the Citizens Council, which is what they were officially known, ostensibly called the White Citizens Council. So you research them throughout history, you can search for White Citizens Council. And he's talking about the need for white people there in Mississippi in 1954 to protect their power, Let's go to this clip.
Born in Mississippi, in the United States, and I'm the product of my heredity and education and the society in which I was raised. And I have a vested interest in that society, and I, along with 1 million other white Mississippians, will do everything in our power to protect that vested interest. It's just as simple as that.
In 1954, the Citizens Council was established in the Delta, the northwest section of the state, where blacks outnumbered whites. The council's purpose, to preserve white political power by opposing integration. Council chapters soon spread across the state.
At the 849 mark, we'll stop.
Within 4 years, the Citizens Council was powerful enough that in the election of 1959, it threw its support openly and actively behind the candidacy of a damage-suit lawyer named Ross Barnett, not one of the world's most successful politicians up to then, and saw him elected over a supposed moderate who was himself a segregationist, but with a quieter voice than Ross Barnett. And from 1959 until 1963, in the Barnett administration, the Citizens Council was the state, and the state effectively on matters racial was the Citizens Council.
Bankers, politicians, and owners of businesses joined the Citizens Councils throughout the South. They punished people who supported integration or black voting rights by foreclosing mortgages, firing workers, or refusing loans to farmers. And they used their influence to push through laws that would ensure continued white domination.
It's primarily a struggle for power. And I think we would be stupid indeed if we failed to see where the consequences of a supine surrender on our part would lead.
At the center of Mississippi's struggle for power was the black vote. In some counties, blacks outnumbered whites 4 to 1. In 1962, in many counties, no blacks were registered.
There's a big psychological, gap to overcome. This, what a lot of people call a psychology of fear on the part of most of the Negroes. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They've been brainwashed. They think that somehow all of this is the business of the white man, and it's not something that they're supposed to be doing.
26-year-old Bob Moses came to Mississippi at the request of Amzie Moore, an NAACP leader. Moses and other SNCC organizers opened offices throughout the state to recruit local Mississippians.
I was asked would I join the
Okay, you can stop it there.
SNCC, which was Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Okay, so you heard William J. Simmons of the White Citizens Council explaining why they wanted to maintain power and what the lengths they would go to maintain power. The White Citizens Council spread from Mississippi, they spread all throughout the South, and they were in Alabama. And this is who African Americans, this was one entity they were fighting against when they launched this economic boycott in 1957. Now, in Macon County, which was the county that Tuskegee, Alabama was in at the time, the educational level of African Americans in Macon County exceeded the educational level of whites in Macon County because of the influence of Tuskegee Institute. And you had the Chicago Daily Tribune, in an article, the Chicago Daily Tribune, they stated, quote, any educational test for voting, no matter how rigorous, is, if fairly applied, would probably result in the enfranchising of more Negroes than whites in Macon County, Georgia. Okay? Because you had a lot of, Macon County, Alabama, because you had a lot of whites who were illiterate. Now, Charles G. Gomillion, he's going to be a plaintiff in a landmark lawsuit that the Supreme Court rules on. He was a dean at the Tuskegee Institute and president of the Tuskegee Civic Association, the TCA, Tuskegee Civic Association. And according to him, this was the, quote, straw that broke the camel's back. The straw that broke the camel's back, quote unquote. Now, African Americans were already frustrated by the Macon County Board of Registrar's failure to register African American voters. And Charles Gomillion and several other African American leaders decided to initiate a merchant boycott, a boycott against the white businesses there in Tuskegee, Alabama. Now, just 4 days after the House, the State House of Representatives voted, 3,000 African Americans, they voted on Act Number 140. 3,000 African Americans gathered at Butler Chapel AME Zion Church. There's one of those long names. Butler Chapel AME Zion Church. Okay, to join the Crusade for Citizenship. Crusade for Citizenship. And they listened to Charles G. Gomillion of Tuskegee Institute urge a trade with friends boycott of local white merchants. Trade with friends boycott of local white merchants. So at this time, once again, Steve, we had a better understanding of politics than many of our people do today, because they understood that they had to withdraw economic support from those who were trying to restrict their political power and those who were trying to do harm to them. So this is what Charles G. Gomillion said. He said, quote, we are going to buy goods and services from those who help us, from those who make no effort to hinder us, from those who recognize us as first-class citizens, and not with those who would seek to devour us. Because the fight also was to be a first-class citizen. If you go back, Medgar Evers last week, when they were fighting for voting rights, they didn't think that if they could vote, that meant they were free. But they understood that voting was something that people who were free did. Okay? And they were fighting for first-class citizenship. They said, we want all of our rights right now. We have to remember, Medgar Evers fought in World War II. And he's coming back home dealing with segregation in Mississippi. Okay? So they said, we want all our rights right now. So the next week after Charles G. Gomillion gives his speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Tuskegee, Alabama to show his support for the economic boycott. Now, this is after the success of the Montgomery Bus Boycott in Alabama, okay? And he spoke to a group of 2,000 African Americans at Washington Chapel AME Zion Church, and he said, quote, you are not seeking to put the stores out of business, but to put justice into business. You are not seeking to put the stores out of business, but to put justice into business. Now, Charles G. Gomillion goes on to say, quote, if white citizens here feel Negroes should not vote, the Negro citizens feel their money should not be spent with these folks. We prefer to spend our money with people who might help us, or who at least are in a poor position to hurt us directly. White people in Montgomery, for instance, okay, so he refers to white people in Montgomery. All right, so now Dr. E.H. Foster, who was the president of the Tuskegee Institute at the time, said, quote, now that they do not want us in the city of Tuskegee, I have no reason to trade there, end quote. So they understood by continuing to do business with these people who are trying to suppress their vote, they were financing their own dehumanization. They were financing their own dehumanization, because the part of the power that the White Citizens Council got was from the dollars that African Americans spent with these white-owned businesses. So they realized that we need to redistribute the pain to those inflicting pain upon us through economic withdrawal strategies.
So within weeks, the economic boycott had plunged local sales by more than 75% there in Tuskegee, Alabama, and put the gerrymandering case in the national spotlight. Consequently, Alabama state officials began an effort to suppress this economic boycott. By the end of July 1957, State Attorney General and future Governor John Patterson led multiple raids against offices of the Tuskegee Civic Association in an effort to discourage the boycott. Well, if you go back to 2016 and you look at in the state of Indiana, where Mike Pence, who's now your vice president, was governor, you saw that Connie Lawson, who was the attorney general there in Indiana, sent state police to a voter registration facility that was known to register a large number of African American voters, and they said they were looking for 10, possibly 10 voter registration forms that were fraudulent, and they confiscated about 45,000. Well, I'm still trying to find out what happened to those 45,000 voter registration ballots that were confiscated. Okay? And I was trying to follow that case, and there's an update from a couple months, from about February. Some people are going to be charged, but a lot of the African Americans there in Indiana think that these are just trumped up charges, and these were registration ballots where there were errors, but there was nothing fraudulent. Because from my understanding of this, if somebody makes a mistake filling out a voter registration ballot, you still have to keep it. You can't discard it. You can't throw it away. You still have to keep it. It goes into a separate pile. People can check out this article from the Washington Post from June 9th. Indiana voter registration group employees charged with falsifying applications. This gives you some background information on this. This is from June 9th. Indiana voter registration group employees charged with falsifying applications. Okay, so on July 29th, 1957, John Patterson, who was the Attorney General, warned African Americans against violating Alabama's anti-boycott law. By August 16, 1957, John Patterson succeeded in obtaining an injunction against Charles G. Gomillion and the Tuskegee Civic Association after having secured an injunction banning the NAACP from operating in the state of Alabama in 1956. The NAACP got banned from operating from within the boundaries of the state of Alabama. This is state law. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So they feared the NAACP so much in Alabama, they banned them from operating in the state of Alabama. And all they're fighting for are the rights that the Constitution says supposed to be ours in the first place. This is what we were dealing with. Okay, so Charles G. Gomillion appreciated the irony. He said, quote, "If we stay away from their churches, schools, and playgrounds, we are wise and understanding Negroes." Okay, because they wanted to shut down the boycotts, and they didn't want them protesting things like this or what have you. Okay, and you had rampant segregation here as well. So the churches are segregated, the schools are segregated, playgrounds are segregated. So he said, if we stay away from these places, we're wise and understanding Negroes. But if we stay away from their stores, we are criminals. If we stay away from their stores, we are criminals. If they did not want our vote, why should they have our money? If they did not want our vote, why should they have our money? So Gomillion said, quote, "If we stay, despite the injunction, okay, the boycott continues. Okay, despite the anti-boycott law in the state of Alabama, the boycott continues. By the end of 1957, over 100 white businesses were forced to close their doors, and many other businesses and dealerships were reporting drop-offs in sales between 40 and 60%. They were redistributing the pain to these people. You had over 100 white businesses that closed their doors.
Did they ever reopen?
I don't think so. I think when you study this, I think they most of them I think were permanently closed. They're shut down. They go out of business because they can't make the money. They're paying leases on their buildings. They're trying to pay employees, things like this. Okay, and what's going to happen is that you're going to have African Americans who decide to go to Montgomery, Alabama, to shop for food and clothes and things like this, and they're making trips to Montgomery, Alabama that are 80-mile round trips to avoid spending dollars with white businesses in Tuskegee, Alabama. They're driving to Montgomery, Alabama, making 80-mile round trips. Okay, and this economic boycott lasts for 4 years because we understood what was at stake. And we understood the power of the vote, and we understood how the vote impacts politics and how politics impacts every aspect of our life. We had a better understanding in many ways of politics and economic boycotts, etc., in 1957-58 than many of our people do today in 2017. I know we're coming up on
I don't understand how they stood together that long.
How they stood together that long?
I looked at the gay bathroom bill. Transgender bathroom
in
bill
North
in
Carolina. Sure.
And I look at how the LGBTQ community stayed together. And I just can't imagine us staying together that long.
Well, if you go, you have peaks and valleys in this protest, but if you look at the conditions that we were living in at that time, I could understand it because you're dealing with generations of segregation being inflicted on people, and they're understanding how they're being dehumanized. So I can definitely understand. But the other thing which is important is I try to explain to people who want to have economic boycotts. You have to be able to show progress in the boycott. They can show progress here by counting the number of white businesses that were shut down. You have to be able to show progress to our people, because then they're going to ask, well, why am I participating in this? If you can't show any progress, if you can't show how you're getting any closer to the end result, people are going to drop off. And this is something that's very important. When you have economic boycotts, you have to have clear-cut goals, and you have to have clear-cut ways of measuring progress, and then you have to be able to disseminate that progress to the people who are involved in the boycott.
And let's talk about the dissemination. How was it disseminated?
Newspapers, African American press. If you did not have the African American press, newspapers, you're going to have a small number of African American radio stations. If you did not have that, you would not have had a civil rights movement, because you need that to be able to communicate with people in mass throughout the city, across the country, things like this. So this economic boycott drew national attention, just like the one in Montgomery, Alabama, and they're able to, newspaper articles and African American newspapers especially, they're able to communicate the results, but also at the churches, Sunday mass and things, Sunday church service, etc. They're able. I grew up Catholic, so that's mass. Okay, but Sunday church services. So they're able to communicate this. But the press was extremely important, and this is why Malcolm X taught us about the power of the media. He said the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the ability to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent, and that's power because they control the minds of the masses.
All right, Michael, we got to take a quick break.
Sure.
When we come back, we'll continue this.
And then we'll get into some of the history of Juneteenth also.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after these words. And Michigan. We're streaming live on 10amSuperstation.com. Download our app. Play us across all Apple, Windows, and Android platforms. I want to remind you all that on this weekend, we're going to be broadcasting live from Detroit River Days. That's right, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We will be there in full effect, broadcasting live via satellite. It's going to be an amazing time. Come on down and join us. It's Thursday. It's Eat Radio. Oh, hell yeah. We feature Michael Imhotep. Michael Imhotep?
Yes.
These tales of woe are getting me, man.
And they're about to get us again, man. If we're not careful, they're about to get us again. But this is why understanding history is so important. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, And what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you have been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you allow City Council to give away $34.5 million to build stadiums that a lot of African Americans won't even have money to go to, won't even be able to afford the parking, and these are stadiums being built by billionaires, and you let them get away with it, they keep doing it. You know, which is why you have to show up and vote these jokers out of office. They keep mistreating you like this. Okay, so if you're just tuning in, we're talking about the Tuskegee, Alabama economic boycott of 1957. A lot of people know about the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott of 55 and 56. This one is in Tuskegee, Alabama. It's not talked about a lot. And this lasts 4 times as long as the Montgomery bus boycott and is very, very successful. And we had a better understanding of redistributing the pain to those inflicting pain upon us at this time. Okay, so you 1957, you have an injunction you have a anti-boycott law passed by the state of Alabama legislature. But African Americans by the end of 1957, you have over 100 white businesses that were forced to close their doors, and many other businesses and dealerships saw massive drop-offs in sales between 40 to 60%. Now, in spite of the economic turmoil caused by this economic boycott, the Tuskegee City Council unanimously voted to deny a petition signed by over 700 African Americans, which requested that the city re-annex the territory removed from the city limits by Act Number 140. And once again, they want Act Number 140 passed by the state of Alabama legislature. What it did was, in an effort to re-gerrymander the district where Tuskegee, Alabama was, they wanted to redraw those district lines to include all of the 600 white voters and put them in this district, and exclude all except 5 of the 400 African American voters. Okay, so this is what they were doing at this time, and gerrymandering continues. Now, Senator Sam Inglehart, state Alabama Senator Sam Inglehart, continues his self-proclaimed crusade to, quote, split Negro political power, quote unquote, split Negro political power, by proposing a constitutional amendment which would enable the state legislature to abolish Macon County. Now, Macon County is a predominantly African American county. They were at first trying to redistrict the county lines also, and then he comes up with the idea of just abolishing Macon County. Now, Macon County at this time, 1957-58, was 84% African American, 25,771 African Americans compared to 4,677 whites. Now, Sam Inglehart wanted to abolish Macon County in order to dilute the African American population among the surrounding predominantly white counties. They're trying to suppress and control the political power that African Americans had with their vote. This is how much they feared it, and they fear today. This is why you have the new voter ID laws. This is why you have the cross-checking system with Chris Kobach, and 1.1 million people knocked off the voter rolls in the 2016 election cycle. It's the same thing, okay? So on December 17th, 1957, the amendment was approved by Alabama's 58 by those citizens of the state of Alabama. 58,000 to 40,000, okay? And the New York Times reported, because there are a lot of New York Times articles about this boycott, because this boycott was national. The coverage of it went national. New York Times said, quote, advocates of the change said it was necessary to prevent Negro control of the county government in view of federal civil rights legislation to use national authority to guarantee voting rights. Advocates of the change said it was necessary to prevent Negro control of the county government in view of federal civil rights legislation to use national authority to guarantee voting rights. Now, while the Tuskegee Civic Association alleged that the, quote, proposal was a device to maintain an undemocratic system of social relationships, a system which cannot be justified morally or politically, end quote. So as the months go on, the Tuskegee Civic Association continued to hold weekly meetings of between 1,000 and 2,000 people at various African-American churches in order to keep up the spirit of resistance. And then when you have these economic boycotts, especially if they're going to be long, it's important. You asked about how they get the information out. This is one of the ways. They have weekly meetings. You're going to have church services, but also African-American media, African-American newspaper gets the word out.
So what are they doing in Macon, though?
Well, Tuskegee is inside of Macon County.
Oh,
Tuskegee, Alabama, the city is inside of the county of Macon, just like Detroit is inside of Wayne County.
All right.
Okay, so in June of 1958, you have an Alabama judge that struck down the injunction against the Tuskegee Civic Association, noting that Americans have the right to trade with whom they choose, and ruling that Attorney General Patterson, Attorney General of the state of Alabama, had failed to substantiate his charges of coercion and intimidation against the organization. Now, I'm not sure how many people know this, but right now, Steve, you have about at least 18 states that are pondering legislation to curtail people being able to protest. These are in Republican states.
We have them here.
Yeah, this is in state legislatures across the country. At least 18. The Washington Post had an article about this back in February or March, because Republicans fear people protesting so much that they're trying to pass laws to criminalize protesters and to make it harder for people to protest as well. So you have to ask the question, well, wait a second, why is this? It must be because a lot of those protests have been effective.
Or they're worried of protests to come.
Or they're worried of protests to come, but a lot of them have been effective.
For example, if they go nuts on this health care bill,
again,
I think we'll see some more protests.
Oh, well, yeah, you're going to see more protests. But the other thing is, the Senate, they're releasing a draft of their bill that 13 men behind closed doors have drafted. A lot of the other Republican senators have no idea what's in it. The Democrats are clueless about what's in it. But they're going to vote on this next Thursday in the Senate. When you had the Affordable Health Care Act, it was over the course of about 14 months.
14 months.
They had hearings, all different types of things like this, right? Over 14 months. The other thing is that they go on recess next Friday.
Right.
And they don't want to go back home and have it pass this. So they're trying to push this through quickly. I don't know if the Congressional Budget Office is going to be able to score it before it's voted on next Thursday.
Right.
I'm not sure if they're going to be able to score it. But when you study this, you start seeing striking resemblances between yesterday and today, 57 and 2017. Okay, so
let's before you
go ahead.
Let's take this call
because I'm going to wrap this up here in a minute here. Okay,
Keith, you're on.
Jim Crow and the babies is the same, but what I don't understand, you're on here every week. How does the person stay in that sunken place? What does Steve do? Go out on cigarette breaks or something while you're doing the show?
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Dude, if you don't like the show, bend over. I'll drive you to Dallas. Anyway.
All right. All right. You still have some people with a...
they don't understand that you have to educate to take forward, man.
Well, you still have people stuck in the brain damage 1957 mentality.
What he was saying was...
a lot of us had more sense back then, but some of us didn't.
You were the sunken place.
Well, how am I in the sunken place?
What he was saying was that Steve, he said that you're in the sunken place. He said you're not listening to Mike.
No. But I'm listening to him.
Right. He's listening to me.
He's an idiot.
Well, I don't know, Keith. I mean, I don't know. So I don't want to call him an idiot.
I don't know him either, but from his words, he's an idiot.
I don't want to call him anything. But
This may or may not apply to Keith. I don't know, Keith. But you do have some of our people, and this may or may not apply to Keith. I don't know. But you do have some of our people who are stuck in a backwards mentality. And this may not apply to Keith. You do have some of our people stuck in a backwards mentality. Okay, but thanks for your call, Keith. Okay, so
you're so nice.
So 2 months. Well, you know,
I'm not because
I may have misunderstood
education is fundamental.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Okay, so in August of 1957, Charles G. Gomillion of the Tuskegee Civic Association and 12 other disenfranchised African American voters filed a federal lawsuit against Tuskegee Mayor Phil Lightfoot and the City Council, contending that Act Number 140 violated the African American voters' constitutional protections. By the end of 1959, participation in the boycott had dropped off significantly. But on February 27th, 1960, 400 students at the Tuskegee Institute reinvigorated the campaign with a peaceful march in downtown Tuskegee, Alabama, followed by a meeting 2 nights later deciding to tighten the boycott to make it 100% effective. Okay? So, on November 14th, 1960, after several lower courts ruled that issues regarding gerrymandering did not fall within the judiciary's purview, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that Gomillion versus Lightfoot was entitled to a full trial to determine if the gerrymandering had the effect of disenfranchising African American voters. So this is a Supreme Court ruling that they deserve to have a trial. 8 Supreme Court justices found that such an effect violated the 15th Amendment. It's the 15th Amendment ratified 1870. Section 1 of the 15th Amendment, which stated the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And 1, voting and concurrence, found it violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, 14th Amendment of 1868. So on February 17th, 1961, federal judge Frank M. Johnson ruled that Act Number 140, passed by the Alabama State Legislature, did have the effect of disenfranchising African American voters and was thus unconstitutional, and issued an order prohibiting officials from enforcing this act. Several weeks later, federal judge Frank M. Johnson delivered another sweeping victory for Macon County African Americans by ruling that the border registrars was actively and deliberately obstructing African American voter registration, and ordered an overhaul of the registrar's operating procedures. With these victories, the 4-year boycott on Tuskegee merchants came to an end. And this was a big victory in Tuskegee, Alabama, that gained national attention. And very few of our people understand this history and how this relates to today.
But how do we take it forward?
Well,
I mean, let's say right now we wanted to do an economic boycott of the Pistons. Okay.
I say the whole NBA. But let me explain this. Okay, first of all, number one, we have to understand the history and the tactics that they implemented and the successes, and you have to be able to measure your progress. Measure your progress. If we just look at what happened with Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly was fired by Fox News because organizations like ColorChange.org and other organizations put pressure on advertisers, and they were able to count the number of advertisers. It went from 10 to 15 to 20 up to 80 advertisers that withdrew economic support from the O'Reilly factor. The Fox News could not make money off of it anymore, and they fired it. But they were able to gain momentum, gain steam. There was media coverage of it, but one of the most important things was they could track their progress. And this is what people have to understand, because with our people, because we're dealing with so many issues and white supremacy and terrorism, things like this, okay, we have to be able to see how our efforts are having an impact. If you can't show how those efforts are having an impact, people are going to lose interest very quickly. So this is something that's extremely important. You have to be able to track this. Okay. So the economic boycott, and when you have these boycotts, right, economic withdrawal strategies, they may start locally, but they should always go nationally. It should be national economic withdrawal from the NBA.
So then,
and I'll tell you why. Go ahead.
So then we would go after an NBA major advertiser, just pick one, and say we're not going to deal with that advertiser.
You can put pressure on the advertisers. This is a strategy that you can implement. First of all, one of the reasons why you should have economic withdrawal strategies of the NBA is because the NBA does not speak up for the rights of African Americans when they're being disenfranchised, when they're being shut down in the street by police, when there's rampant voter suppression. Now, if we look at what happened with the transgender bathroom bill in North Carolina, the NBA moved the NBA All-Star game from the state of North Carolina because of the bathroom bill, and they moved it to another state, the 2016 NBA All-Star game. When has the NBA canceled a game because too many African Americans were being shot and killed in the city? Or when have they canceled a game because the state was imposing voter suppression on African Americans? Yet the NBA is 80% African American. So you can speak up for LGBT, but you can't speak out for BLACK. So you put pressure on those teams, and then you go after their advertisers, and you say, well, wait a second, African Americans spend X amount of billions of dollars with you on an annual basis, X amount of hundreds of million dollars with you on an annual basis. Now, you spoke out for the LGBT community in this instance here. In North Carolina, etc., or you spoke out for the LGBT community in Indiana in March of 2015 when Governor Mike Pence signed the Indiana Religious Freedom Law into law. Okay, and then a little more than a week later, the state legislature was forced to change it because of so much economic pressure put on them by corporations. Okay, now they say, where do you stand on this issue with us? Okay, because either you speak out for us, or we're going to withdraw our economic support from you. You can start with the NBA. NBA is good, number one, because 80% of the NBA is African American. Number two, a lot of corporations that advertise with the NBA, we spend money with. Okay, and then it can spread to other corporations. Now, something interesting. If you go study the economic boycotts that Reverend Jesse Jackson had in civil rights leader. Let's put it like that. Civil rights leader in the 80s and 90s. Okay, if you look at the economic boycotts then, 80s and 90s, Coca-Cola, Burger King, Anheuser-Busch. The one with Anheuser-Busch didn't pan out like they wanted to, but it was good to have it.
Oh, I think it did.
The reason why they got something for it.
They sure did.
They got something for it. Something like $5 million. I forgot exactly what it was.
And a couple distributorships.
But the reason why the one with Anheuser-Busch was so important was because at that time in 1981, African Americans spent $800 million with Anheuser-Busch.
Really?
Yes.
What, on 40s or Colt 45?
Just in general on their brands. There was an article.
Did you ever have a Colt 45?
No, I never had a Colt 45, man.
A beer named after a bullet.
And Billy D. Williams said it works every time. He didn't say what it did, but he said it works every time. I remember those commercials, man, watching Soul Train, man, when I was a kid, and seeing the Coke 45 commercials. Okay, so when you look at those economic boycotts from the 80s and 90s, they were very successful. Coca-Cola was the most successful one, but they had economic withdrawal strategies. They had economic withdrawal of one corporation at a time. They didn't say we're going to boycott these 17 to 18 corporations. They did one after another. And when they did it, it put some of the other ones on alert. And they got scared. They did one, and they made an example out of it. They do Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, they did KFC, Texaco, okay, Mitsubishi. All right, so we need to study that history, and then also look at recent ones. 2014, towards the end of 2014, you had the TV show on VH1, Sorority Sisters. Okay, Sorority Sisters was a TV show that many African Americans felt negatively depicted African American women in African American sororities, Delta Sigma Theta Alpha Kappa Alpha. Yeah, exactly. It did. Zeta Phi Beta, etc. So you had African American organizations that had put pressure on the advertisers, and 19 advertisers pulled economic support from that show. VH1 put it on the shelf. You haven't heard anything else from it since. So we have these examples in our recent history. Okay, and we need to study these and understand how they were implemented. Just last week, Steve, the city of New York announced that they have divested $48 million in pension funds from privatized prisons. A lot of pensioners had money in privatized prisons. A lot of people right now who will listen to this show, if you have pension funds or you have 401ks, a lot of them are invested in privatized prisons and people don't know it. The city of New York just divested from privatized the pension fund for the city of New York employees. They divested $48 million in pension fund dollars from privatized prisons. So if we're against privatized prisons, there's strategies to redistribute the pain and withdraw economic support from these entities that we are against. This just happened. Financial Juneteenth had an article about this.
And that's what you call Mayor de Bill de Blasio.
Say that again?
That's what you call Mayor de Bill de Blasio.
What do you mean?
I mean, if they're going to divest like that, that's obviously got to come from the mayor's office.
Okay. Financial Juneteenth had financialjuneteenth.com had an article, and they picked it up from the New York Daily Post or New York Daily News. NYC pension fund will stop investing in privatized prisons. The New York Daily News reports that the New York City pension system has become the first in the country to fully divest from private prisons, something critics of the prisons will no doubt be happy to hear. Following a unanimous vote from the fund's trustees, the city sold off about $48 million in stocks and bonds of 3 private prison companies. So they're so when you deal with economic withdrawal strategies, there are various ways to implement it, and you can have different campaigns operating at the same time in different cities. But when something like this should go national with withdrawing pension funds. Because a lot of people don't think, where are my pension fund dollars invested? Right. A lot of people don't think, where are my 401k dollars invested? You know, I know we're coming up on the break, so when we come back, we'll get into the history of Juneteenth.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with Michael Imhotep. Think it ain't illegal yet.
Exactly. All right. And, you know, right before the break, we were talking about the economic boycott in 1957 in Tuskegee, Alabama, fighting for voting rights, redistributing the pain to white citizens council, and the power structure there, inflicting pain upon them. I want to let people know quickly here. This Saturday, June 24th, at Second Baptist Church, there is a voters forum. It's free and open to the public. It's a voters forum, and it's taking place 12 noon to 2:30 p.m. 441 Monroe Street between Beaubien and Brush. 441 Monroe Street between Beaubien and Brush. And these forums offer an opportunity to meet the candidates, become informed of candidates' platforms, and provide an opportunity to have your concerns heard. Okay, all segments of the metropolitan area are welcome. And once again, this is for more information. You can contact them Thursday and Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 313-961-0920. 313-961-0920. You can contact them Thursday and Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And this is a voters forum sponsored by the historic Second Baptist Church Board of Christian Social Concerns, Saturday, June 24th, 2017, 12 noon to 2:30 p.m. Okay, so definitely come out for that.
Who do you know at Second Baptist?
I know a few people at Second Baptist, man. I know a few people at Second Baptist. All right, so we know this past Monday was June 19th, okay? And that's also known as Juneteenth, all right? Now, Juneteenth is a annual African-American celebration that commemorates June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, when Major General Gordon Granger lands in Galveston, Texas, to deliver General Order Number 3 to announce that the enslaved African people there in Galveston, Texas, are free. Now, this is actually at the end. This is after the Civil War ends. The Civil War officially ends June 2nd, 1865. We know the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered January 1st, 1863. Okay? Now, the Emancipation Proclamation itself did not free the slaves. We talked about this before. And if you go back to November 6, 1860, okay, when President Abraham Lincoln is elected president, he is the Republican candidate for president. And the Republican Party was created by groups of abolitionists after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. All right, and the Republican Party had run on an anti-slavery platform, and many Southerners felt that there was no longer a place for them in the Union. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union. And then by February 1st, 1861, you have 6 more states that are going to follow. You have Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. And they're going to form the CSA, Confederate States of America, the Confederate States of America. Now, in Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address on May 4th, 1861, Lincoln proclaimed that it was his duty to maintain the Union. It was his duty to maintain the Union, and he also declared that he had no intention of ending slavery where it existed or by repealing the Fugitive Slave Act, the Fugitive Slave Law. And this was a position that horrified many African Americans and their white allies. Lincoln's statement, however, did not satisfy the Confederacy, and on April 12th, you have the attack on Fort Sumter, which is a federal stronghold in Charleston, South Carolina. And you're going to have federal troops that return fire, and this was the start of the Civil War. So the Civil War starts April 12, 1861. So you're going to have the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. You're going to have a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation delivered in 1862, and the goal of this was to bring the South back into the Union and also to strip the South of those enslaved African people who were the cooks for the Confederacy. They were cooks, they were nurses, they were digging ditches, all different types of things. They were blacksmiths. The Confederacy was using enslaved Africans for their labor also. Okay? Now, as we talked about before, you have the border states like Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri that were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation. These are border states that stayed in the Union. They were sympathetic to the South. They're going to stay in the Union, and they're going to be allowed to keep their slaves as well. All right? So what's going to happen is after the Civil War ends, on June 19th, 1865, you have Union Major General Gordon Granger, along with 2,000 Union troops. They go into Galveston, Texas. They deliver General Order Number 3. And an excerpt of what it said was, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free." Okay? And this date is commemorated as Juneteenth. Okay? Now, you're going to have celebrations that start the next year throughout Texas to commemorate Juneteenth. You're going to have African Americans throughout Texas. They're going to be set free, but the last ones to be set free were in Galveston, Texas. So you're going to have this commemoration throughout Texas in 1866, and it's going to spread to other southern states, and it's also going to spread out west when African Americans start to migrate out west. We see this happening after World War II. We see them going into California, going into places like Oakland, California, Los Angeles, things like this. And you're going to start seeing Juneteenth die out in Texas, okay? You're going to start seeing a resurgence of it in the 1980s. We start seeing a resurgence of Juneteenth. And 1994, you have the modern Juneteenth movement that is created when advocates from across the country gathered in New Orleans, where they pledged to work for national recognition of the holiday. You're going to see other Juneteenth organizations that are going to pop up as well to commemorate this date, commemorate this celebration, and teach this history also. Deal with the history of the Civil War, deal with the history of also what happened after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era, etc. So a lot of people refer to this as African American Independence Day because when you look at the 4th of July, as many of us call it, July 4th, African Americans, most of us were still enslaved, okay? So you have people celebrating, having picnics and things like this, or cookouts with the 4th of July, but most of our people were still enslaved, whereas Juneteenth celebrates when those last enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas, found out they were free.
You're trying to blow my high off the 4th of July, man?
No, I'm not trying to blow your high off the 4th of July. I'm just telling you what it is.
Because I like the 4th of July.
Why do you like it?
Oh, well, I like doing the hot dogs, sausages, and like, hanging out,
right,
chilling,
right. I understand.
I like the fireworks,
right. I understand. So that's the celebration. That's the celebration. Those are the festivities around the celebration, but it doesn't get to what people are actually celebrating. That's just the festivities. That's just like the icing on the cake. It doesn't get to what people are celebrating. But when we look at Juneteenth, you're going to see some traditions that come about. By the year 1900, the festivities had grown to include baseball games, horse races, street fairs, rodeos, railroad excursions, and formal balls also. You're going to have two distinct trends that are going to emerge with these early celebrations. First, the oldest of the surviving former slaves were often given a place of honor, number one, that's understandable, and that place of honor rose direct in proportion to the dwindling numbers of survivors of slavery with each passing year. And secondly, African Americans in Texas initially used these gatherings to locate missing family members, and soon they became staging areas for family reunions. And when you study what happens after slavery ends, one of the first things that we do is start searching for lost loved ones. Husbands searching for wives, parents searching for children, because we're trying to put the family back together. And if you look at the Freedmen's Bureau, the U.S. Bureau for Freedmen, Abandoned Lands, and Refugees, one of the things that they do is assist African Americans in trying to find lost loved ones. They're taking out newspaper ads and all different types of things like this and providing resources to help African Americans put the family back together again. Because we always value family, even during slavery, even on the slave plantations. We always value family, and after that as well. For more information on Juneteenth, check out blackpast.org. They have a good article, Juneteenth, the Growth of an African American Holiday, 1865. Juneteenth, the Growth of an African American Holiday, 1865. Also check out Juneteenth.com, Juneteenth.com. They have a lot of information there about Juneteenth as well. And then for the Tuskegee Boycott of 1957, BlackThen.com has an article about this, BlackThen.com. June 17th, 1957, the Tuskegee Boycott began. June 17th, 1957, the Tuskegee Boycott began. And then also there was a good article entitled Black Citizens Boycott White Merchants for U.S. Voting Rights, Tuskegee, Alabama, 1957. Black Citizens Boycott White Merchants for U.S. Voting Rights, Tuskegee, Alabama. And that is from NV Database at Swarthmore University, NV database, and they have they cite a lot of good articles here from the New York Times from 57, 58, from other newspapers at that time, for the Philadelphia Tribune. So there's some history on this boycott, but most of our people don't know about this history, don't know that this boycott existed. So hopefully people learn something from this, and I think it's important to study Juneteenth and to celebrate Juneteenth and understand that what's going to happen as the Union troops go through different territories, they're going to free those enslaved African people. And so different groups of enslaved Africans are going to have different days that they were set free. But Juneteenth was the day that in Galveston, Texas, the last group of enslaved Africans were free, except for some of the ones that are going to be owned by Native Americans, who we call Native Americans or Indians, because we know that you have groups like the Cherokee, you have groups like the Choctaw, things like this. Some of them, they're going to keep their slaves to 1866 and 1867 because they said that they were sovereign, didn't want to give them up. This leads to that Black Freedmen Indian Treaty of 1866 that we talk about sometime. So the history is fascinating, but it definitely relates to today, because if we look at what's going on today with what's taking place with politics, what's taking place with voter suppression, we see how history is repeating itself. We look at more information regarding Donald Trump. We see him lowering up even more, even though he says the Russian investigation is a witch hunt, is a hoax. He's bringing on more attorneys. We see Vice President Mike Pence lowering up. We just saw Attorney General Jeff Sessions get his own personal attorney. Now, what's interesting, there are more people who need to lawyer up, but these guys are the ones who can afford it, or they can set up a PAC. They can. These are the ones that afford it, because there are a lot of people. There are a lot of White House staffers or junior staffers who need to lawyer up, but they don't have that type of money.
I've never seen anything like this.
Exactly. It's worse than Watergate.
Yeah.
It's worse than Watergate.
I don't know how long the guy can hold on.
I think he's going to, like I said, he's going to be forced to resign. If you were shot when Ali B. Foreman's behind, wait till you see Donald Trump resign. I think by the end of the year, he's going to be forced to resign.
All right, where can we find you this weekend, Michael?
AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Saturday, I will be in Lansing at the Shabazz Center. Saturday, June 24th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'll be doing a presentation there on Malcolm X and in Lansing, Michigan. We'll have that information on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sunday, I'll be in Capitol Hills, Maryland, I think it is, for screening the Black Friday documentary. And also listen to the African History Network show every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on 9:10 a.m. The Superstation, the voice of Detroit. And once again, Steve, thanks for having me on.
All right. Mr. Macon, you were excellent this morning. Ramontang, as ever. And you, the listeners, education first. Think it ain't illegal yet. Stay tuned for Reverend D. Alexander Bullock, the People Show.